Michael thought he had everything: a loving wife, a thriving business, and the perfect life others envied. But when he crossed a line with his wife's personal assistant, a dangerous chain of secrets, betrayal, and deadly consequences began that would destroy far more than his marriage. Ethan Cole had built what many would consider an enviable life, the kind that seemed immune to chaos or scandal. He owned a successful real estate firm that had grown from a small family business into a regional powerhouse. His name carried weight in business circles. His house stood like a modern fortress on the edge of a wealthy suburb, and his wife, Claire, was admired by friends for her elegance and dedication. Together, they projected stability and success. Yet, beneath the surface, cracks had begun to form in places Ethan barely noticed. It started with the subtle rhythm of daily life, shifting, small coincidences and opportunities that slowly reshaped the way he moved through his days. The trigger came when Claire decided she needed a personal assistant. Her schedule had become chaotic with charity events, travel plans, and managing their social obligations. She wanted someone capable, discreet, and efficient. When Leela walked into their lives, she seemed to check every box. Leela was in her mid-20s, confident but unassuming, with an energy that made her both approachable and quietly commanding. She blended into the household effortlessly, learning Claire's habits, managing her calendar, and helping with a range of personal and professional tasks. But it wasn't long before Ethan began to notice her presence more than he intended. It wasn't her appearance at first that caught his attention, it was her availability. She was always around, always ready to help, and always perfectly composed. Late-night work sessions in his home office became less lonely when she appeared with files or coffee. Small conversations about schedules or documents stretched into longer moments, not because they had much to say, but because neither seemed eager to leave. Over time, their interactions took on an unspoken familiarity. Ethan began scheduling more of his work from home, subtly adjusting his days so their paths would cross more often. Leela, for her part, never made obvious advances, but her body language spoke volumes. She leaned closer than necessary when showing him paperwork, lingered just a moment too long when handing him a folder, and seemed to be everywhere he turned. It created a dangerous proximity, one that Ethan told himself was harmless, yet felt more deliberate with each passing week. Claire, meanwhile, had no reason to suspect anything was changing. She trusted Leela completely, even praising her for keeping their household running so smoothly. The irony was that Leela's efficiency gave Ethan more time alone with her. Business trips became a perfect excuse. Leela was often tasked with delivering last-minute contracts or arranging meetings, and Ethan began using these moments to test boundaries. Their first moment of real physical closeness wasn't planned. It happened in the quiet space between a routine task and an impulsive decision. From that point on, something shifted inside him. The secrecy became intoxicating. Ethan found himself craving these stolen interactions, rearranging his obligations to create private windows of time. At first, it was all about hidden moments in the house when Claire was away, subtle touches during work discussions, and whispered plans disguised as logistical conversations. He convinced himself it was under control, that he could maintain the balance between his public life and his hidden one. But with each risk they took, the stakes grew higher. Leela proved to be a master at moving unnoticed. She could slip into a room and vanish just as easily. It made her perfect for the kind of affair Ethan was cultivating. She was careful with her phone, never leaving messages or photos that could be traced. When they met, it was always under the guise of work, even in the most personal of settings. To the outside world, she was simply the assistant professional, polite, and indispensable. Inside the walls of their home, she was something entirely different. The more Ethan indulged in the secrecy, the less he paid attention to the small details that might betray him. He didn't notice how often his mood changed depending on when he had last seen Leela. He didn't think about how his schedule shifts might appear to Claire. He didn't realize that, despite their efforts to keep it hidden, patterns were forming, patterns someone with a sharp eye could follow. But there was someone watching, someone who had already begun piecing together small fragments of the truth. Ethan had no idea that a silent observer was already in play, someone close enough to notice the subtle glances and the awkward timing of certain events. A person who saw the way Leela would linger in the hall outside his office, or the way Ethan's voice changed when he spoke to her compared to anyone else. This observer wasn't ready to act, but they were collecting mental notes, filing away details that might one day be useful. Ethan, too focused on his own desires, never considered that his private world might already be under quiet surveillance. The affair wasn't just a reckless indulgence, it was a slow unraveling of the image Ethan had spent years building. He told himself that nothing would come of it, that he could keep the two worlds separate forever. But as each day passed, the line between professional and personal blurred beyond recognition. And with every blurred line came another opportunity for the truth to slip through the cracks. By the time Ethan realized the danger, it was already far too late. The seeds had been planted, the trail had begun, and someone unseen but persistent was waiting for the right moment to bring it all into the light. The perfect life he had built was no longer as solid as it seemed, and the fault line ran straight through the center of his own home. Claire began noticing changes in her husband long before she admitted it to herself. At first, they were easy to dismiss: a late meeting here, an unexpected trip there, a distracted expression when she spoke to him. She chalked it up to stress. Ethan's business had been expanding, and she knew success came with sacrifices. But there was something else in his demeanor, something she couldn't quite name. His phone seemed to be always within arm's reach, his laptop open at odd hours, and his patience with her had grown thinner, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. It was subtle enough that most people would have ignored it. Claire might have done the same if it weren't for the receipts. They appeared one evening when she was organizing their office files, a small stack of papers tucked between invoices. They weren't unusual at first glance, but the dates and locations didn't match any trips she knew about. Expensive hotel stays in the city, dinners for two at restaurants Ethan rarely visited with her, and small luxury purchases that didn't seem like business expenses. She placed them aside without confronting him, her instincts telling her that asking too soon would only make him more careful. Leela's presence in their lives had been nothing short of a relief at first. She handled Claire's schedule flawlessly, managed personal errands, and made the daily chaos feel organized. Claire trusted her completely. She had no reason to believe the young woman was anything other than a loyal employee. But as she reviewed those receipts again late at night, a strange thought crept into her mind. Leela was always around. She was there when Claire left for charity meetings, there when she returned late from events, and often working in Ethan's office even after her tasks for the day were done. It wasn't just the receipts. There were other details that didn't sit right. A faint trace of perfume in Ethan's car that wasn't hers. A missing cufflink that later appeared in the laundry room with no explanation. Text notifications flashing briefly on Ethan's phone before he quickly turned the screen away. Claire's gut told her something was wrong, but she wasn't about to confront him without knowing for certain. She needed facts, hard proof that couldn't be denied or explained away. That's when she made the decision to hire a private investigator. She didn't tell anyone. Not even her closest friends. It had to be discreet. If Ethan caught wind of it, he would change his habits, and any chance of learning the truth would vanish. The investigator, a man named Harris, specialized in domestic cases. He assured her that within a few weeks, they would have enough information to confirm or dismiss her suspicions. Claire handed him a list of Ethan's upcoming commitments, along with the addresses of his usual meeting spots. She didn't mention Leela by name, though the thought of her lingered heavily in her mind. The first week brought little. Ethan's schedule looked normal, with trips to the office, occasional client dinners, and late nights at home. Harris noted that nothing seemed out of place. But in the second week, the tone of his reports changed. There were inconsistencies, meetings that ended earlier than Ethan claimed, unaccounted hours between appointments, and short detours to quiet neighborhoods far from their home. Harris began following more closely, using discreet cameras and long lenses to capture moments Ethan thought were private. One photograph stood out among the others. It showed Ethan standing outside a hotel in the late afternoon, talking to a woman whose face was partially obscured by her hair. She wore a fitted blazer and carried a leather folder, the same style Leela often used when managing Claire's paperwork. In the next image, taken moments later, the two were walking inside together, close enough that their arms brushed. Claire stared at the photos for a long time, her pulse pounding. She didn't need to see her face clearly to recognize her. Still, she didn't confront them. She told Harris to keep going, to dig deeper. She wanted more than just a picture of them entering a hotel. She wanted undeniable evidence, the kind that would strip away any excuse or explanation. Over the following days, Harris tracked their movements with increasing precision. He followed Ethan on supposed client lunches that ended in parking garages, captured images of Leela leaving Ethan's car in casual clothes, and documented her frequent presence in their home when Claire was away. The most damning discovery came when Harris checked Ethan's phone records. There were dozens of calls and text messages exchanged with a number registered under a generic business contact, but cross-referencing it with Leela's work phone confirmed it belonged to her. The calls weren't just during work hours, they stretched late into the night, sometimes for more than an hour. Harris even traced several calls made while Claire was asleep in the same house. When he handed Claire the thick envelope of evidence, she didn't open it right away. She kept it on her nightstand for 2 days, unable to bring herself to face the reality she already knew. When she finally looked through it, there was no room left for denial. Every photo, every timestamp, every phone log painted a picture so clear that it almost felt staged. The affair wasn't just real, it was happening under her nose, in her own home, with the woman she had trusted most. Her emotions shifted quickly from shock to cold calculation. She understood that rushing into a confrontation would only give Ethan the chance to hide or destroy evidence. Instead, she decided to play along, maintaining the appearance of normalcy. She spoke to Leela the same way she always had, kept her tone with Ethan calm, and made no mention of what she knew. The only difference was that now, every interaction she witnessed between them was filtered through the knowledge of their betrayal. What Claire didn't expect was that the more she watched, the more she began noticing other details, things that went beyond infidelity. Leela was using her role to gain access to confidential files from Ethan's office. She would remove documents under the guise of organizing them, scan them on her laptop, and quietly return them before anyone noticed. It wasn't clear what she was doing with the information, but Claire suspected it wasn't for anything innocent. The betrayal was now layered, not just personal, but potentially criminal. She began to realize that she wasn't just dealing with a cheating husband. She was dealing with a situation that could destroy their business, their finances, and their reputation if it became public. Ethan, blinded by his obsession, either didn't see it or didn't care. Claire knew she had to tread carefully. She needed more than proof of an affair, she needed to uncover exactly how deep this went and who else might be involved. By the end of the month, she had transformed from a suspicious wife into a silent strategist. She had the truth in her hands, but she wasn't ready to reveal it. Not yet. Every day she played the role of the unaware spouse, all while preparing for the moment when she would bring the entire situation crashing down. What Ethan and Leela didn't know was that Claire's silence was not a sign of ignorance, it was the calm before a storm neither of them would see coming. Claire kept her composure in the days that followed, masking the storm that churned inside her. Her routine remained unchanged on the surface. She attended charity events, managed household affairs, and engaged in polite small talk over dinner with Ethan, all while concealing the fact that she was now several steps ahead of him. Her mind no longer lingered on the simple fact of his betrayal, she had moved past the personal sting and into the realm of strategy. What Harris had uncovered had shifted everything. Leela was not just a distraction pulling Ethan away from his marriage. She was actively undermining his business. The realization transformed this from a domestic scandal into a matter of survival. The proof of corporate theft was subtle but damning. Harris had managed to obtain footage from a hidden camera he placed in Ethan's home office. It showed Leela working late into the night on several occasions, accessing locked filing cabinets when Ethan wasn't present. She handled documents with practiced precision, photographing them with her phone before returning them exactly as she found them. This wasn't the behavior of a careless woman caught up in an affair. This was methodical, deliberate, and dangerous. Harris's research revealed that she had previously worked for another real estate firm, one that happened to be a competitor of Ethan's. That firm had suffered a suspicious data leak the year after she left. Claire didn't believe in coincidences. As she pieced together the timeline, it became clear that Leela's presence in their lives had been anything but accidental. She had been placed close to them, perhaps deliberately targeting Ethan through her position with Claire. The affair, in hindsight, might have been part of the plan all along. By drawing Ethan in emotionally and physically, she could manipulate him into overlooking her movements, making it easier to access sensitive information without raising suspicion. Claire saw now that Ethan wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a liability being exploited. Instead of confronting him, she focused on gathering every possible piece of evidence. She had Harris dig into Leela's financial history, looking for unexplained income or connections to rival companies. She began discreetly backing up the contents of Ethan's office computer, saving copies of documents that Leela might have touched. She even went so far as to discreetly install a small GPS tracker in Leela's car one afternoon when she knew both Ethan and Leela were distracted. Every move Leela made from that point forward was mapped, her visits to certain office buildings and private residences logged and analyzed. The more Claire learned, the more dangerous the situation appeared. Leela was meeting with a man who was not publicly linked to Ethan's business, but was known in certain circles as a corporate fixer, someone who handled the darker side of competitive business, from insider trading to sabotage. Harris was able to photograph them together in a parking garage, exchanging an envelope. Claire's instincts told her that envelope contained more than just casual paperwork. Meanwhile, Ethan's behavior toward Leela grew more reckless. He began spending nights away from home under flimsy pretenses, leaving Claire alone in their house with her own thoughts. She noticed that when he returned, he often seemed agitated, as though he was juggling multiple pressures. She suspected Leela had begun asking more of him, perhaps large sums of money, perhaps access to even more sensitive files. Whatever it was pulling him deeper under her control. Claire kept her distance emotionally but not observationally. Every time Ethan left a device unattended, she seized the opportunity to photograph text conversations and emails. Most of their exchanges with Leela were heavily coded, using vague terms that would mean nothing to an outsider. But when paired with the timelines Harris was constructing, the patterns became clear. Certain meetings aligned perfectly with document disappearances. References to closing deals or delivering packages matched dates of suspicious transactions in Ethan's accounts. The most unsettling piece of evidence came late one evening when Harris dropped off a flash drive. On it was footage taken from outside a hotel room door. It showed Ethan entering with Leela, followed not long after by a man Claire recognized from the parking garage photographs. The three remained inside for hours. Harris believed that Ethan had been roped into a meeting he didn't fully understand, possibly to hand over stolen documents directly. The fact that he was present for such an exchange meant he could now be implicated in whatever scheme Leela was running. Claire understood that time was running out. If Ethan continued down this path, he might cross a line that could not be undone. His name, his business, and even his freedom could be destroyed not just by the exposure of their affair, but by criminal charges tied to corporate theft. She also knew that if Leela sensed she was being watched, she would disappear before they could stop her, leaving Ethan to face the fallout alone. To make matters worse, Claire began noticing signs that Leela might be aware of her growing suspicion. On 2 occasions, she caught Leela glancing at her with an expression that seemed to weigh and measure, as if testing whether Claire knew more than she let on. A few items in Claire's private study were moved ever so slightly, suggesting someone had been inside while she was out. Claire started locking certain drawers and keeping duplicates of key documents hidden offsite. She didn't share these details with Harris at first. She wanted to see if Leela would slip up. That opportunity came sooner than expected. One afternoon, while Claire was supposedly at a luncheon, she returned home early and saw Leela's car in the driveway. From the shadows of the hallway, she watched as Leela moved swiftly through Ethan's office, gathering papers into a slim folder. Before leaving, Leela placed something into the inner pocket of her blazer, a small, black USB drive. Claire didn't confront her, but she committed every detail to memory. That USB could very well hold the proof of everything they'd been searching for. The balance of power had shifted in Claire's mind. She no longer saw herself as the betrayed wife waiting for justice. She saw herself as the one holding the final card, the only person who could bring this entire arrangement crashing down. But she couldn't act impulsively. The evidence had to be airtight, the timing perfect. Each night, as she lay next to Ethan, she thought about how much he didn't know, how blind he was to the trap tightening around him from both sides. Leela thought she was controlling the game, using seduction and manipulation to get what she wanted. Ethan thought he was indulging in a private thrill that would never see the light of day. But Claire knew the truth. She knew that when the time came, both of them would fall, and she would be the one to pull the lever. She just needed to wait a little longer. Every day brought new threads to weave into the net she was building. And when it closed, there would be no escape for either of them. Ethan was too far gone to notice the danger circling him. His affair with Leela had shifted from excitement to fixation, the kind of pull that blurred his judgment and made him ignore every warning sign. What had begun as stolen moments had evolved into something he believed he couldn't walk away from. She had woven herself into every corner of his life, not just physically but emotionally, convincing him that their connection was unique, worth protecting at any cost. He didn't realize how much control she now held over him until she began making demands that went beyond affection. It started subtly requests for expensive gifts, access to company accounts under the guise of helping with business tasks, and favors that seemed harmless at first. But with each request, she pushed a little further. She would suggest transferring small sums of money to cover emergencies, encourage him to bring home certain files, and hint that she needed confidential information to help his company grow. Ethan, flattered by the idea that she wanted to support him, didn't see the trap tightening. He thought he was protecting their relationship. In reality, he was handing her everything she needed to destroy him. Leela was careful never to appear greedy in front of him. She mixed her demands with moments of charm, ensuring he felt wanted and appreciated. She understood that to keep him compliant, she had to balance her control with a steady stream of validation. What Ethan didn't see was that every gift, every favor, and every shared secret became another piece of leverage she could use against him if he ever tried to pull away. He was tangled in a web of his own making, believing he was the one making choices when, in truth, every move was orchestrated. Meanwhile, Claire was watching all of it unfold. She had grown accustomed to observing without interfering, letting the picture sharpen until there was no possibility of misinterpretation. But in recent weeks, the stakes had shifted. Leela's influence over Ethan had grown more dangerous, and the risks were no longer confined to their marriage. The evidence pointed to outright criminal activity. Documents that had vanished from Ethan's office were later found in the possession of known corporate operatives, and money had been funneled into accounts with no legitimate business purpose. The turning point came when Harris, the investigator, vanished for 3 days without explanation. When he finally resurfaced, he told Claire that Leela had intercepted him during a surveillance operation. She had approached his parked car late at night, tapping on the window with a calm but chilling demeanor. Without raising her voice, she made it clear she knew exactly who he was, what he was doing, and who had hired him. Her warning was blunt: if he continued to dig, she would make sure it ended badly for him. The fact that she had tracked him down so easily unsettled both Harris and Claire. This encounter proved something Claire had already suspected. Leela was no longer simply playing defense. She was taking the fight directly to anyone who threatened her. The more aggressive she became, the greater the chance she would make a mistake, but the danger was equally real. Claire knew that one wrong move could cause Leela to disappear completely, leaving Ethan to face the consequences alone. It was a delicate balance: apply enough pressure to expose her, but not so much that she bolted. Ethan remained blissfully unaware of all this. He believed the only threat to their arrangement was the possibility of Claire finding out, completely missing the bigger picture. His secrecy toward his wife intensified. He began locking his devices with new passwords, keeping his briefcase with him at all times, and deflecting even the most casual questions about his schedule. Claire played along, careful not to provoke suspicion. She needed him to think he was still in control. What Ethan didn't know was that Claire had already infiltrated his digital world. Through a quiet collaboration with Harris, she had installed monitoring software on one of his devices, giving her access to emails, messages, and documents in real time. She watched as he forwarded files to Leela late at night, read coded messages about meetings that clearly weren't business-related, and saw confirmation numbers for hotel reservations she had never heard about. Each new piece of data was cataloged, time-stamped, and stored in a secure location, ready for the moment it would be needed. As Leela's grip on Ethan tightened, her tone in their exchanges shifted. The requests became more direct, sometimes carrying the faint edge of a threat. If Ethan hesitated to give her what she wanted, she would remind him how much she knew about his personal and professional life. She hinted that she could destroy his marriage and his reputation in an instant, painting herself as both the source of his pleasure and the architect of his potential ruin. The more she reminded him of what was at stake, the more desperate he became to keep her satisfied. Claire knew this couldn't continue much longer. The longer Ethan was under Leela's influence, the more vulnerable he became to being completely exploited. but she also recognized that she needed the right moment to act. She couldn't simply walk into a police station with photographs of an affair. She needed a case that would stand on its own in a court of law, one that connected Leela to the theft, the manipulation, and the conspiracy to use Ethan as a pawn. She began to map out her plan in detail. Harris would continue his surveillance, focusing less on Ethan and more on Leela's independent movements. Claire would quietly prepare her own finances, ensuring that no matter what happened to Ethan, her assets would remain untouched. She also began making subtle changes in the household, switching out the locks on certain drawers, having a locksmith reinforce her personal safe, and keeping duplicate keys and flash drives hidden in places only she knew. The tension in the house became almost palpable, though Ethan seemed too distracted to notice. His conversations with Claire grew shorter, his time at home more fragmented. Leela's visits became bolder. She would arrive when Claire was supposedly out, stay for hours, and leave without any attempt to disguise her presence. Claire suspected this was part of Leela's strategy, a calculated effort to test boundaries and gauge how far she could push without triggering confrontation. By now, Claire was certain that Leela believed she had both Ethan and the situation entirely under her control. That arrogance would be her undoing. The plan was taking shape, and when the pieces finally aligned, the collapse would be swift and absolute. Ethan would be exposed, Leela would be trapped, and Claire would walk away with everything she needed to rebuild her life without either of them in it. But timing was everything. One move too soon could let them escape, and one move too late could pull her into the fallout. For now, she kept her mask firmly in place, speaking to Ethan with the same calm tone she always had, smiling politely when Leela was mentioned and never giving either of them reason to suspect just how much she knew. Every day brought them closer to the edge, and when the moment came, there would be no way back. The day Claire had been waiting for arrived on a cold, wet evening, the kind where the streets glistened under the dim glow of streetlights and the air carried the heavy scent of rain. Everything was in place. Weeks of careful planning had come down to this: every photo, every email, every transaction documented and backed up in multiple locations. Harris had been working in the shadows, coordinating with law enforcement, building a case strong enough to withstand scrutiny from any angle. It was no longer just about the affair. This was about fraud, theft, and conspiracy, each charge supported by undeniable evidence. Claire had ensured there would be no chance for either Ethan or Leela to twist the narrative. She had chosen this night deliberately. Ethan believed she was away at a weekend spa retreat, and Leela had taken the bait when he suggested she come over. They had done this before, using Claire's absence as their private sanctuary, certain they were untouchable inside the walls of the home Claire had built. What neither of them knew was that the house was now rigged with hidden cameras, every room a silent witness. Harris had also tipped off the police, arranging for them to arrive the moment the meeting turned into something incriminating. Claire didn't go far. She remained parked in a quiet street just a few blocks away, her phone in hand, tracking the live feed from the surveillance cameras. She watched them enter the house together, their laughter muffled by the rain tapping against her car windows. Leela carried a large leather bag, the same one she had used in previous thefts. Ethan seemed relaxed, almost giddy, unaware that every step he took was sealing his fate. Claire's heart pounded, not from sadness but from a cold, controlled anticipation. Inside the house, Ethan led Leela into the office, where she pulled documents from her bag and spread them across his desk. The cameras caught everything: papers marked confidential, spreadsheets showing off the book's transactions, and a small black USB drive identical to the one Claire had seen weeks earlier. They spoke in low tones, leaning close over the desk, their focus shifting between the documents and each other. From the way they moved, it was clear they believed they were safe, hidden from the outside world. Harris's signal came through her phone, a simple text with one word: go. Moments later, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the night. They grew louder, closer, until the blue and red lights flashed against the rain-slicked windows of the house. Claire could see the exact moment panic set in. Ethan froze, his eyes darting toward the front door, while Leela began hastily shoving papers back into her bag. But it was too late. The police moved in quickly, their knock sharp and commanding before the door swung open under their authority. The officers spread through the house in seconds, their voices firm as they separated Ethan and Leela. Harris was there too, standing just outside the doorway, his camera still rolling. Claire watched it all unfold on her phone, the feed shaking slightly as adrenaline surged through her. Leela's bag was searched on the spot, revealing the stolen documents, the USB drive, and a folder filled with printouts of Ethan's financial records. Ethan's protests were weak, stumbling over half-formed excuses that collapsed under the weight of the evidence. When the police read out the charges, the reality began to sink in. Leela was accused of corporate theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Ethan faced charges of aiding and abetting, along with potential fraud charges tied to the off-the-books accounts. Their hands were cuffed, their faces pale and drawn, the shock settling over them like a heavy fog. The neighbors, drawn by the flashing lights and the commotion, stood at a distance, murmuring among themselves. The perfect image Ethan had worked so hard to maintain was unraveling right there on his own front lawn. Claire didn't need to be seen. She remained in her car, watching from the shadows as the two of them were led into separate police vehicles. The satisfaction was quiet, almost eerie in its calmness. There was no rush of triumph, no dramatic wave of emotion, just the steady certainty that justice had been delivered exactly as she intended. She thought back to all the nights she had smiled across the dinner table, pretending not to know, all the days she had allowed them to believe they were outsmarting her. In the end, their arrogance had been the final nail in their own coffin. The next morning, the story broke across local news channels. The headlines told of a well-known businessman and his assistant facing serious criminal charges. Photographs of Ethan being led away in handcuffs were plastered across every media outlet, accompanied by the details of the stolen files and fraudulent accounts. Leela's mugshot appeared beside his, her once confident expression replaced by something cold and hollow. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, eager to dig into the scandal that had been hiding behind closed doors. Claire stayed out of the spotlight. She let the narrative play out without her name attached, declining interviews and refusing to comment. Her lawyers, however, moved swiftly. Within days, divorce proceedings were filed, citing irreconcilable differences and irreparable trust. The evidence of Ethan's crimes ensured she would walk away with the lion's share of their assets, her financial stability untouched by his mistakes. She also took steps to protect the business from total collapse, bringing in new leadership and cutting ties with anyone associated with Leela's network. Ethan, for his part, quickly discovered that Leela's loyalty had never been to him. As soon as they were in custody, she began negotiating for a lighter sentence, offering details about his role in the scheme. Whether those details were true or exaggerated hardly mattered. The damage was done. The trust between them shattered instantly, replaced by mutual blame and desperate self-preservation. Each one tried to shift responsibility onto the other, their alliance crumbling under the weight of impending prison sentences. Weeks turned into months as the legal process dragged on. Claire remained composed throughout, appearing in court only when necessary, always dressed in the quiet confidence of someone who had already moved past the chaos. She didn't waste time wondering whether Ethan regretted his choices. Regret was meaningless now. The life they had shared was over, dismantled piece by piece, and she had no intention of looking back. In private moments, she reflected on how close she had come to losing everything, not just her marriage, but her financial security, her reputation, and her sense of control. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also sharpened her instincts, teaching her the value of patience and precision. She had not acted out of impulse or anger. She had waited, planned, and executed her response with the same discipline she once used to support Ethan's career. The difference was that this time, the victory was hers alone. By the time the trials concluded, both Ethan and Leela were serving sentences. Their names had become cautionary tales in the community, whispered in the same breath as warnings about greed and arrogance. Claire, meanwhile, had rebuilt her life on her own terms. The house remained hers, though she had it renovated to erase any trace of the life that had once unfolded there. The rooms that had witnessed deception and betrayal were now filled with the quiet assurance of someone who had survived and triumphed. On the anniversary of that rainy night, Claire found herself standing by the front window, looking out at the same street where she had waited in her car, watching everything unravel. The rain fell softly again, the same way it had done, tapping against the glass like a memory she no longer feared. She thought about Ethan and Leela, about the choices they had made, and about how certain they had been that they could get away with it. And then she thought about the moment it all ended, not with shouting or chaos, but with the quiet click of a camera, the turn of a key in a police car door, and the sound of rain washing their lies away.